The Galactic Military Academy had stood for 3,000 cycles, producing the finest tactical minds across 47 star systems. Not once, in that entire history, had a first-year cadet managed to capture their instructor during a training exercise. Not once, until today, apparently. Commander Vrell'ix stood in the observation deck, all four of his optical stalks twitching in what could only be described as profound confusion mixed with grudging respect. Below him, through the reinforced viewing panels, his colleague, Senior Tactical Instructor Korm'val, hung suspended in a web of the cadet's own making, wrapped so thoroughly in adaptive netting that only his face remained visible. And even that was turning an interesting shade of purple. "So," Vrell'ix said slowly, his translation implant working overtime to convey the appropriate level of sarcasm. "When you assigned the defense simulation exercise, you did specify that capturing the attacking force was acceptable?" "I did not." Korm'val hissed through clenched mandibles. "The parameters were clear. Design a defensive position, repel the assault, survive for 20 standard minutes. Nowhere in those instructions did it say trap and capture your instructor like some kind of predatory arachnid." The human in question, Corporal Maya Torres, stood at parade, rest approximately 3 meters from her thoroughly ensnared instructor. She was small by human standards, maybe 1.6 meters tall, with dark hair pulled back in the regulation style that all Terran Defense Force personnel seemed to favor. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Vrell'ix had been teaching humans long enough to recognize that particular gleam in her eyes. She was trying very, very hard not to smile. "Corporal Torres," Vrell'ix said, his voice booming through the intercom system, "would you care to explain how you interpreted a defensive exercise as an invitation to commit what I can only describe as instructor kidnapping?" Torres looked up at the observation window, and this time a small smirk did escape. "Sir, with respect, the objective was to neutralize the attacking force. Instructor Korm'val was the attacking force. I neutralized him. Mission parameters satisfied." "Neutralized!" Korm'val thrashed in his bindings, which only made him spin slightly. "I am a decorated combat veteran with 40 years of tactical experience. I have commanded fleet actions. I have outmaneuvered Krellnor battle groups. I do not get neutralized by a first-year cadet using string and audacity." "Adaptive carbon fiber netting, sir," Torres corrected helpfully. "Not string, though I appreciate the comparison. It really was remarkably simple once I understood your approach patterns." Vrell'ix watched as 3 of his optical stalks focused on the human, while the 4th examined the training ground below. It was, he had to admit, an impressive setup. What should have been a straightforward defensive position, maybe some barriers and automated turrets, had instead been transformed into something that resembled a hunting ground. The entire scenario had been designed to be impossible, of course. That was rather the point. First-year cadets were supposed to fail, supposed to learn from failure, supposed to understand that sometimes, no matter how clever you thought you were, superior force and experience would overwhelm your position. It was a lesson in humility, in recognizing limitations, in understanding when to call for backup or execute a strategic withdrawal. Humans, Vrell'ix was learning, had apparently never received the memo about accepting impossible odds gracefully. "Walk me through it," Vrell'ix said, settling his bulk into a more comfortable position. This was going to be entertaining, if nothing else. From the beginning. "And Corporal, please release Instructor Korm'val." "Of course, sir." Torres pulled a small remote from her pocket and pressed a button. The netting immediately loosened, depositing Korm'val onto the ground with a distinct lack of dignity. To his credit, the instructor rolled to his feet quickly, brushing off his uniform with sharp, angry movements. "I studied your previous scenarios," Torres began, her voice taking on that particular tone humans used when they were about to explain something they found obvious, but knew others would find baffling. You have a pattern, sir. You always attack from the position of maximum advantage. High ground when available, superior firepower, multiple approach vectors. You test whether cadets can maintain discipline under overwhelming assault. Sound tactical doctrine, Korm'val snapped, still picking pieces of netting from his uniform. Proven effective across countless campaigns. Absolutely, sir, Torres agreed, but predictable. Once I identified the pattern, I could plan accordingly. The exercise parameters gave me 48 hours to prepare the defensive position. I spent the first 6 hours doing reconnaissance. Reconnaissance? Vrell'ix leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. The training ground was provided to you. What was there to reconnoiter? Your habits, sir. Both of you. Torres gestured at Korm'val. I accessed public records of previous training exercises, watched recordings, analyzed approach patterns. Instructor Korm'val, you favor attacking from elevated positions at angles between 30 and 45 degrees. You use suppressive fire to pin defenders, then execute a flanking maneuver. Classic and effective. Korm'val's mandibles clicked together in what might have been grudging acknowledgement. So I built my entire defense around that knowledge, Torres continued. She pulled up a holographic display, showing the training ground from above. The obvious defensive position was here, in the center valley. Good sight lines, natural cover, easily fortifiable. That's where you'd expect me to be. Where you should have been, Korm'val interjected. Where I wanted you to think I'd be, Torres corrected. I set up decoys, thermal signatures, movement sensors, even an audio loop of me arguing with myself about defensive placement. All designed to convince you that I was following standard doctrine. Vrell'ix felt a ripple of amusement pass through his sensory nodes. While you were actually... Where? Torres grinned, and it was the kind of expression that made Vrell'ix remember why so many species found humans simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. I was in the trees, sir. Specifically, in a camouflaged observation post I built on day 1. Watching, waiting, calculating exactly when Instructor Korm'val would commit to his attack on my fake position. The holographic display shifted, showing a different angle. Vrell'ix could now see what he'd missed during his initial observation of the setup. The entire valley floor wasn't just a defensive position. It was a funnel. Every apparent piece of cover, every seemingly random obstacle placement, they all channeled the movement toward a specific point. A specific point that was absolutely covered in concealed netting launchers. You turned the entire exercise area into a trap, Vrell'ix said, his voice a mixture of horror and admiration. Yes, sir, Torres said simply. Once Instructor Korm'val committed to his attack vector, which happened exactly 4 minutes into the exercise, I triggered the primary capture system. The netting deployed from 16 different angles simultaneously. Given the instructor's momentum and position, evasion was mathematically impossible. Mathematically impossible, Korm'val repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. You calculated the mathematical probability of capturing me. I did, sir. It came out to approximately 94%, accounting for variables in reaction time and environmental factors. I considered those acceptable odds. The observation deck fell silent. Vrell'ix looked at Korm'val. Korm'val looked at Torres. Torres maintained her carefully neutral expression, though that dangerous gleam in her eyes had intensified. You know, Vrell'ix said slowly, when High Command assigned me to train human cadets, they warned me that Terrans had an unusual approach to military doctrine. They said humans had a tendency to, and I quote, think sideways when everyone else is thinking forward. I thought they were exaggerating. We get that a lot, Torres said. The exercise was supposed to teach you about defensive limitations, Korm'val said, having apparently recovered his composure. About knowing when a position is indefensible, about making the hard choice to fall back or request support. Instead, you turned a training scenario into a hunting expedition. With respect, sir, I did defend my position. My position just happened to include aggressive counter-capture tactics. There is no such thing as counter-capture tactics. Vrell'ix made a sound that his species used to indicate both exasperation and amusement. It came out as a sort of whistling chirp that made Torres look up at him curiously. Corporal Torres, you understand that this completely undermines the pedagogical intent of the exercise? I understand that the exercise had clear parameters, sir, and I operated within those parameters. You never specified that capturing the instructor was prohibited, because no one in 3,000 years has ever thought to try. With respect, Commander, that sounds like a training problem. If students have been following the same patterns for 3,000 years, maybe it's time someone tried something different? The audacity of the statement hit Vrell'ix like a physical force. Here was a first-year cadet, barely 6 months into her training at the most prestigious military academy in the known galaxy, suggesting that perhaps the academy's methods needed updating. And the truly infuriating part was that she had a point. Korm'val clearly didn't see it that way. Different? You want different? Fine. Let me tell you what's different about humans, Corporal. Every species we've trained here understands that military discipline requires following established protocols. But humans? Humans see protocols as suggestions. You see rules as challenges. You see impossible scenarios as personal invitations to prove everyone wrong. Do you know how exhausting that is? Sounds like a compliment to me, sir, Torres said. It wasn't meant as one. And yet here we are. Torres gestured at the training ground. Mission accomplished. Defensive position held. Attacking force neutralized. 0 casualties. I'd call that a successful exercise. Vrell'ix settled back, all 4 optical stalks now focused on the human cadet. This was the moment where most students would back down, would recognize they'd pushed too far, would offer an apology, and accept whatever reprimand was coming. But Torres just stood there, confident and unapologetic, apparently willing to defend her methods against 2 senior officers with a combined 80 years of military experience. It was maddening. It was inappropriate. It was absolutely contrary to every principle of military hierarchy and respect for established authority. It was also, Vrell'ix had to admit, exactly the kind of thinking that made human soldiers so effective in actual combat. Out of curiosity, he said carefully, what would you have done if your trap had failed? If Instructor Korm'val had somehow evaded your netting system? Torres didn't hesitate. I had 3 backup plans, sir. Plan B involved a secondary capture system using modified gravity dampeners. Plan C utilized flash charges and smoke to cover a tactical withdrawal to a fortified secondary position. Plan D was to call in artillery support from the reserve unit on the North Ridge. There is no reserve unit on the North Ridge, Korm'val said. There is now, sir. I recruited a team of second-year cadets who were running their own training exercise nearby, offered them extra credit if they'd provide supporting fire on my signal. They were surprisingly enthusiastic about the possibility of seeing an instructor captured. Vrell'ix's optical stalks did something they'd never done before. They all focused on the same point simultaneously, creating a sensation of such concentrated disbelief that he had to manually override his nervous system to stop them from tangling together. You recruited other cadets into your scheme to potentially fire on an instructor during an official training exercise. Supporting fire only, sir. All safety protocols observed, and I wouldn't call it a scheme so much as a tactical alliance. Korm'val made a sound like grinding metal. Commander, permission to fail this cadet immediately and have her reassigned to sanitation duty on a waste processing station? Denied, Vrell'ix said, surprising himself. Corporal Torres, you are dismissed. Return to your quarters. We will discuss your performance evaluation later. Torres snapped to attention, saluted crisply, and turned to leave. She made it exactly 3 steps before Vrell'ix called out. "Corporal." "Yes, sir?" "The part about recruiting second-year cadets. That was improvised, wasn't it? You made that up just now, to see how we'd react." The smile that crossed Torres's face was absolutely radiant. "I'll never tell, sir." She left before either instructor could respond, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Vrell'ix and Korm'val stood in silence for a long moment. "She's going to be trouble," Korm'val finally said. "She's going to be magnificent," Vrell'ix corrected. "Assuming she doesn't get expelled first. You're not actually going to pass her for this, are you?" She completely violated the spirit of the exercise. She completed the objective using available resources and innovative thinking. "That's literally what we're supposed to be teaching." Vrell'ix paused, then added, "Though I'll admit, her interpretation was more creative than we anticipated." "Creative? That's what you're calling it? What would you call it?" Korm'val considered this carefully. "Terrifying. I'd call it terrifying. Because if this is what one first-year human cadet can accomplish with 48 hours and some netting, what are they going to do when we give them actual weapons and real missions?" That question hung in the air like a threat and a promise combined. In her quarters, Maya Torres sat on her bunk and pulled out her personal data pad. She opened a secure messaging channel to her older brother, currently serving on the human cruiser Defiant, somewhere in the outer reach. The message was simple. "Dear Marcus, just finished my first major tactical exercise at the academy. I think I made an impression. The instructors are probably discussing whether to promote me or expel me. Possibly both. Remember how Dad always said that if you're going to make a mistake, make it memorable? I think I followed his advice. Miss you. Stay safe. Maya." She hit send, then flopped back on her bunk, grinning at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she had advanced combat theory. Maybe she could find a way to make that instructor question their career choices too. It was going to be a good year. 3 weeks after what was now being called the netting incident across the entire academy, Maya Torres found herself sitting in Commander Vrell'ix's office, wondering if this was finally the moment she'd be expelled. The office was surprisingly modest for someone of Vrell'ix's rank. No trophies, no display of medals, just tactical charts covering 3 walls and a desk that looked like it had survived at least 2 wars. The commander himself was reviewing something on his datapad, all 4 optical stalks moving independently as they scanned different sections of text. "Do you know why you're here, Corporal?" he asked, without looking up. "I assume it's about the advanced combat theory assignment, sir. The assignment where you were asked to analyze a historical battle and identify tactical errors?" "Yes, sir." "And you chose the Battle of Telvros Prime." "I did, sir." Now, Vrell'ix looked up, 2 stalks focusing on her while the others continued reading. "A battle that I personally commanded 23 years ago." Maya kept her expression neutral. "The assignment didn't specify that we couldn't analyze recent conflicts, sir. And Telvros Prime is considered a textbook example of successful siege warfare. It's taught in at least 6 different courses here. As an example of what to do correctly? Yes." Vrell'ix set down his datapad. "You, however, wrote a 15-page analysis explaining everything I did wrong. You identified 17 separate tactical mistakes, suggested alternate approaches for each, and concluded that while the battle was won, it could have been won faster, with fewer casualties, and with better strategic positioning for the subsequent campaign." "That's accurate, sir. You gave me a grade. In your analysis, you assigned my command decisions a score of 72% effectiveness. Also accurate, sir, though I'd like to note that 72% is still a passing grade. Barely." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either an explosion or an execution. Maya had experienced enough of both types to recognize the difference. This one, she decided, was leaning toward explosion. "Corporal Torres," Vrell'ix said slowly, each word carefully measured, "I won that battle. I saved the colony. I prevented the Krellnor advance. That victory is literally carved into the memorial wall in the Academy's main hall. You did, sir. And I acknowledge that in my paper. You won with the information and resources available at the time. My analysis simply suggests that with different tactical choices, the outcome could have been achieved more efficiently. More efficiently, Vrell'ix repeated. You're telling me, a commander with 4 decades of military experience, that I could have been more efficient? With respect, sir, yes, that was the entire point of the assignment. To analyze and improve. If we're only supposed to say that historical commanders made perfect choices, what's the educational value? Vrell'ix made that whistling chirp sound again. Your instructor, Professor Talmek, gave you full marks on this paper. That surprised her. He did? He did. Then he came to my office, apologized profusely, and suggested that perhaps we should create a new rule preventing cadets from analyzing battles commanded by current faculty members. He seemed quite distressed. I can imagine, sir. Can you? Can you imagine how it feels to have a first-year cadet who wasn't even born when I was fighting that battle? Tell me that I miscalculated artillery placement and wasted 6 hours on a flanking maneuver that could have been accomplished in 2? Maya considered lying, decided against it. Honestly, sir, I imagine it feels similar to how Instructor Korm'val felt when he ended up wrapped in netting. Surprised, frustrated, and maybe just a little bit impressed, despite yourself. For a moment, she thought she'd gone too far. Then Vrell'ix made a sound like escaping steam, which she'd learned was the Vrell'ix equivalent of laughter. You have absolutely no sense of self-preservation, do you? I prefer to think of it as commitment to honest evaluation, sir. Of course you do. Vrell'ix pulled up another file. Since you seem so confident in your analytical abilities, I have a proposal. There's a multi-species tactical competition happening in 6 weeks. Teams of 3 cadets from different academies across the sector compete in increasingly complex scenarios. The Academy has sent teams for the last 30 years. We've never won. Never, sir? Not once. We've placed in the top 10 occasionally, but never first. The Korthan Academy has won 15 of the last 20 competitions. They're very proud of that fact. Insufferably so, actually. Maya leaned forward slightly. And you want me on the team? I want you to lead the team. You'll select 2 other cadets, any species, any year, any specialization. You'll have 4 weeks to prepare. The scenarios are classified until the competition begins, so you can't prepare specific tactics. You'll need to be adaptive. Adaptive is my specialty, sir. So I've noticed. Vrell'ix's optical stalks all converged on her. But here's the interesting part. If you win, I'll personally approve your advancement to 2nd year ahead of schedule. Full honors. Your record will show early promotion based on exceptional tactical performance. Maya's heart rate picked up. Early advancement was nearly unheard of. And if I lose, sir? If you lose, you'll write a formal apology to every instructor whose methods you've criticized. You'll serve as assistant to Instructor Korm'val for the remainder of the term, and you'll stop turning my academy into your personal proving ground. That was a significant penalty. Assistant to Korm'val would mean months of tedious work and constant supervision. The apology letters would be humiliating, and stopping her tactical experiments would be, well, boring. What if I don't accept the challenge, sir? Then nothing changes. You continue as a first-year cadet, following the standard curriculum, and I continue having meetings like this, where I try to figure out whether you're a genius or just dangerously creative. Can't I be both, sir? That's what concerns me, Corporal. Maya thought for exactly 3 seconds. I accept, sir. I'll need access to cadet records to select my team, and I'll need training facility reservations for evening sessions. Already arranged. I had a feeling you'd say yes. Vrell'ix pushed a datapad across his desk. Here's everything you need. Team registration closes in 48 hours. The competition format includes individual combat scenarios, group tactical challenges, and a final simulation that tests everything simultaneously. She picked up the datapad, already scrolling through cadet profiles. "Permission to ask a question, sir?" "At this point, I doubt I could stop you." "Why me? There are older cadets, more experienced teams already training together. Why give this opportunity to someone who's been here less than a semester?" Vrell'ix's optical stalks moved in a pattern she couldn't quite interpret. "Because in 40 years of military service, I've learned that sometimes the best tactical advantage is the one your opponent doesn't expect. The Korm'val Academy will prepare for standard academy doctrine. They'll study our previous teams, our traditional approaches, our typical strategies. They won't prepare for you. Because I don't follow standard doctrine. Because you don't even acknowledge that standard doctrine exists. You treat every scenario like a puzzle with multiple solutions, and you keep trying approaches until you find one that works. It's frustrating, insubordinate, and occasionally brilliant." "Thank you, sir. It wasn't entirely a compliment, Corporal. Now get out of my office and start preparing. You have 4 weeks to prove that humans aren't just lucky, they're actually as tactically innovative as they claim to be." Maya stood, saluted, and headed for the door. She made it halfway through before Vrell'ix called out again. "Corporal Torres." "Yes, sir?" "No netting. The competition has very specific rules about allowable equipment. I don't want you disqualified because you tried to capture the judges." She grinned. "Understood, sir. No netting for the judges. I'll find something else." The sound of Vrell'ix's exasperated whistling followed her all the way down the corridor. By evening, Maya had reviewed 300 cadet profiles and narrowed her choices down to 2 candidates. The first was easy. Rico Vance, a third-year human cadet, specializing in electronic warfare and systems hacking. He was technically gifted, had a reputation for creative problem-solving, and according to his file, had once crashed the Academy's entire communications grid by accident, while trying to optimize the cafeteria's meal ordering system. Perfect. The second choice was more controversial. Liz, a second-year Thanari cadet, from a species known for their methodical, cautious approach to everything. Thanari weren't warriors by nature. They were engineers, analysts, long-term planners who thought in decades rather than moments. Most tactical teams avoided recruiting them because they were considered too slow, too careful, too unwilling to take necessary risks. But Maya had watched recordings of Liz during simulation exercises. While other cadets rushed into scenarios, Liz would spend the first 5 minutes simply observing, mapping patterns, identifying weaknesses. And when Liz finally moved, it was with absolute precision. Zero wasted motion, perfect execution. She found them both in the training facility's observation lounge. Rico was supposedly studying combat formations, but was actually trying to hack into the snack dispenser to get free protein bars. Liz was reading a technical manual that looked thick enough to stop small arms fire. "I need a team for the sector competition," Maya announced without preamble. "We have 4 weeks to prepare, the scenarios are unknown, and we're competing against academies that have been training together for years. Interested?" Rico looked up from the snack dispenser, which was now flashing error messages in 3 different languages. "You're the netting girl, the one who captured Korm'val." "Guilty. I'm in." "When do we start?" Liz closed the manual with deliberate care. "What makes you believe we can succeed where previous teams have failed?" Previous teams followed doctrine, studied historical competitions, tried to predict scenarios and prepare specific responses. That's playing the game their way, by their rules, on their terms. And your approach? We prepare for everything by preparing for nothing. We practice adaptation, not memorization. We learn to work together so well that we can adjust tactics in real time, mid-scenario, without needing to stop and plan. We become unpredictable. Liz's compound eyes blinked slowly. Unpredictable is inefficient. Unpredictable introduces unnecessary variables. Unpredictable keeps opponents off balance. They can't counter strategies they can't predict. And efficient doesn't matter if you lose efficiently. Rico laughed. She's got you there, Liz. Come on. When else are you going to get a chance like this? Worst case, we lose and have a funny story. Best case, we make history. I do not particularly care about making history, Liz said carefully. However, I do care about proving that the Nari can contribute meaningfully to tactical operations, despite species-wide stereotypes suggesting otherwise. If you believe this approach has merit, I will participate. Excellent, Maya pulled out the datapad with their team registration. Sign here, here, and here. Then meet me at Training Complex 7 tomorrow at 0500. We've got work to do. The next 4 weeks were, to put it mildly, intense. Maya's training approach was unlike anything either Rico or Liz had experienced. Instead of running standard drills or studying previous competitions, she threw them into increasingly absurd scenarios with minimal preparation. Day 3, she woke them at midnight and gave them 60 seconds to plan an assault on a position she'd prepared. When they failed, she made them do it again, and again, and again, each time changing one variable until they learned to assess and adapt without overthinking. Day 7, she had them practice communication exercises where each team member could only use 3 words at a time. The goal was to develop a shared tactical vocabulary so efficient that complex strategies could be conveyed almost instantly. Day 12, she arranged a surprise, the scenario where all their equipment malfunctioned simultaneously. They had to complete the objective using only environmental resources and teamwork. Rico managed to turn a broken comm unit into a makeshift explosive. Liz calculated structural weaknesses in the target building by analyzing shadow patterns. Maya felt genuinely proud. By day 20, they were finishing each other's tactical sentences. Rico would identify a security weakness. Liz would calculate the optimal approach vector, and Maya would already be moving before either of them finished speaking. It was working. On the final day before the competition, Commander Vrell'ix stopped by their training session. He watched silently as they executed a hostage rescue scenario in 4 minutes and 38 seconds, a task that typically took experienced teams 15 minutes minimum. Impressive, he said when they finished. How do you feel about your chances? Confident, Maya replied. We're not the most experienced team, and we're definitely not following any standard tactical doctrine. But we're fast, adaptive, and we work together better than any team I've seen. The Korthan team is led by Vrask, a 5th-year cadet with 3 competition wins already. His team is legendary. They've studied together for 2 years. They know each other's every move. Then they'll know exactly what to expect from each other, Maya said. That's predictability. That's a weakness we can exploit. Vrell'ix's optical stalks twitched. You really believe that, don't you? You genuinely think predictability is a disadvantage? In combat situations with unknown variables? Absolutely, sir. The team that adapts fastest wins. Doesn't matter how perfect your plan is, if the situation changes and you can't adjust. I hope you're right, Corporal, for all our sakes. The Korthan Academy's commandant has been insufferable about their winning streak. I would very much enjoy seeing his reaction to a first-year cadets team taking the title. He left without another word, but Maya could have sworn she saw something that looked almost like a smile. The competition took place on a neutral station, a massive training facility that could simulate dozens of different environments simultaneously. 23 teams from academies across the sector had registered. The energy in the main assembly hall was electric, competitive, and more than a little hostile. Maya's team drew looks, ranging from curious to dismissive. A first-year human leading a mismatched team with a Thanari and a cadet known more for hacking vending machines than tactical brilliance? They were clearly the underdogs. Perfect. The first round was individual combat scenarios. Each team member faced randomized opponents in a virtual environment. Maya drew a zero-gravity boarding action scenario and completed it in record time by using explosive decompression to incapacitate her opponents rather than engaging in direct combat. Rico turned his scenario, a stealth infiltration mission, into a chaos generator by hacking the facility's systems and making every team think every other team was the enemy. Liz methodically eliminated 17 opponents over 43 minutes of what could only be described as perfectly calculated, absolutely boring, flawlessly executed tactical superiority. They advanced to round 2. The second round was team-based tactical challenges. 3 teams competed simultaneously in the same environment, racing to complete objectives while interfering with each other's progress. Maya's team went up against a Korthan squad and a Velrathi military school team. It lasted 11 minutes. Maya's team ignored the obvious objectives entirely, instead focusing on disrupting the other team's communications and creating false intelligence that sent both opponents chasing ghosts while they calmly completed the actual objectives. By the time the other teams realized they'd been outmaneuvered, it was over. 6 teams remained. For the finals. "This is it," Maya said, as they prepped in the staging area. "Final scenario. Everything we've trained for comes down to the next hour. Whatever they throw at us, we handle it together. No second guessing, no hesitation. Trust the team. Trust the training. Trust yourselves." "Inspiring speech," Rico said, "though maybe less inspiring than actually winning would be." "I appreciate your focus on practical outcomes," Liz added. The scenario loaded, and Maya felt her breath catch. It was a city siege. 6 teams defending different sections of an urban environment against waves of increasingly difficult attacks. Last team standing won. But here was the twist. Teams could form temporary alliances, share resources, or actively sabotage each other. The Korthan team was in the adjacent sector. Vrask's squad, legendary and experienced. Maya could practically feel them analyzing the scenario, planning their defense according to decades of military doctrine. "Liz," Maya said, quietly. "Structural analysis. Identify weak points in our sector and theirs." "On it." "Rico, can you access their communication channels? Does a Krelnor have 6 arms? Give me 3 minutes." Maya studied the scenario map, her mind racing through possibilities. Standard doctrine said, fortify, defend, survive. But standard doctrine was for standard situations. This was anything but standard. "Change of plans," she announced. "We're not defending." Both teammates looked at her. "The scenario says, last team standing wins," Maya continued, speaking quickly. "It doesn't say we have to defend our sector. It just says we need to survive. So here's what we're going to do." She laid out the plan in 45 seconds. Rico's eyes went wide. Liz's compound eyes did that slow blink thing that meant either profound understanding or complete disbelief. "That is insane," Liz said finally. "That is beautiful," Rico corrected. "That is us," Maya said. "Let's show them what happens when humans stop playing by everyone else's rules." The simulation began. 5 teams immediately fortified their positions, preparing for the incoming assaults exactly as expected. 1 team, Maya's team, abandoned their sector completely and disappeared into the urban environment. Chaos ensued. What happened over the next 47 minutes would be analyzed in tactical courses for years afterward. How a first-year human cadets team, rather than defending, went on the offense. How they used the attack waves meant for other teams as cover for their own movements. How they systematically eliminated defensive positions not by overwhelming force, but by creating situations where teams either had to leave their fortifications or be overrun by enemies they couldn't handle. The Korthan team fell first, betrayed by their own predictable defensive patterns. 3 other teams collapsed under concentrated attacks they'd been baited into positions unable to withstand. The final team, a veteran squad from the Outer Rim Academy, lasted until minute 43 before Maya's team executed what could only be described as controlled demolition of an entire city block, bringing down buildings in a cascade that left nowhere to hide. When the simulation ended, there was absolute silence in the observation hall. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire facility was on their feet. Maya's team had won. A first-year human cadet, leading a mismatched, inexperienced team, had just defeated the best tactical students in the sector. In the academy viewing area, Commander Vrell'ix turned to Instructor Korm'val. "Still think she's just trouble?" Korm'val's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Oh, she's definitely trouble. But she's our trouble now. And I suspect the rest of the galaxy is going to learn what that means soon enough. Should I be concerned about what she'll do with early advancement to second year?" "Commander, we should probably be concerned about what she'll do with anything. But that's what makes teaching humans so interesting." "Interesting," Vrell'ix repeated. "That's certainly one word for it." They watched as Maya's team was presented with the championship trophy, a ridiculous, oversized thing that Rico immediately tried to see if he could hack. "You know what the truly frightening part is?" Korm'val said quietly. "What's that?" "She's going to inspire others. Every human cadet in this academy is going to see what she accomplished and think they can do the same. We're going to have an entire generation of humans who think rules are optional and impossible scenarios are just challenging puzzles." Vrell'ix considered this. "Yes, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying." He paused. "I can't wait." Back on the station, Maya Torres accepted her trophy, shook hands with competitors who looked at her with expressions ranging from respect to bewilderment, and tried very hard not to grin too widely at Vrell'ix's barely concealed frustration. She'd done it, proven her approach worked, shown that sometimes the best tactical advantage was simply being willing to try things no one else would consider. Her communicator buzzed. A message from her brother Marcus. Saw the competition feed. Dad would be proud. Also slightly terrified. Mostly proud. "Don't get expelled before I visit next month." She typed back. No promises. 4 months later, Commander Vrell'ix stood before the assembled second-year class, preparing to introduce their new advanced tactics instructor, a temporary position, filling in while their regular professor was on research sabbatical. "I'm pleased to introduce someone who has demonstrated exceptional tactical innovation during her time at this academy," Vrell'ix announced. "Though I use the word pleased loosely, as she's also demonstrated an exceptional ability to give me stress-induced optical stalk spasms. Please welcome Corporal Torres, who will be assisting with your tactical scenario designs this term." Maya stepped forward, trying not to laugh at the collective expression of concern from students who'd heard stories about the netting incident and the competition victory. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Fair warning, though, I have some very interesting ideas about how to make your training scenarios more engaging. I promise you won't be bored." In the back row, several students exchanged worried glances. In the front row, a few leaned forward with interest. And in the observation deck above, Vrell'ix and Korm'val settled in to watch what would undoubtedly be an entertaining semester. "Should we be monitoring her lesson plans?" Korm'val asked. "Probably," Vrell'ix admitted. "Though, I suspect it won't matter. She'll improvise regardless." "True. So what do we do?" Vrell'ix's optical stalks moved in what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "What we've been doing, we adapt, we learn, we accept that humans are going to keep challenging everything we thought we knew about tactics and doctrine, and occasionally we try not to get caught in their traps. Literally or figuratively. At this point, I'm not sure there's a difference." They watched as Maya began her first lesson, already engaging students with questions that had no clear answers, scenarios that had no standard solutions, challenges that would require them to think in ways they'd never been taught. It was going to be an interesting semester. Actually, it was going to be an interesting few decades, assuming humans kept producing tactical minds like Maya Torres. The galaxy, Vrell'ix reflected, was either very fortunate or completely doomed. Possibly both. Definitely both. And somehow, that thought didn't bother him nearly as much as it probably should have.